Good evening, everyone, and welcome to BT's on the Fly. Tonight, the 26th of March, I'll be tying rotary tying techniques. And who am I? Well, I'm Beatty from Boise, Idaho. Before we get into tonight's presentation, though, I wanted to talk to you about rotary tying because I think a lot of people look at rotary tying as something that's fairly new. You know, rotary vise came along kind of after some of the stationary vices, like reaching back in time a ways, the Thompson A and so forth. But in actuality, Gretchen's father and some of the cousins and sisters were involved in the commercial fly tying business here in the United States, starting in the 20s, going through up until the 50s when he had another business that he had to retire the fly tying business. But they tied on rotary machines at that time made out of a treadle sewing machine. And so that's what I'm going to start tonight with is to look at history, and then we'll get into some actual rotary tying techniques. But first, I've got to turn to one of my cameras that I use for everything under the sun. And this is my over-the-shoulder camera, but if I switch directions, it goes over here. And this is where Gretchen keeps all of her hackle and so forth. It's already sized, but that's not what we're trying to show you right now. What I'm going to do is use this as a traveling vise or a traveling camera to leave my fly tying room and go out into our rec room where we hold all of our fly tying classes and show you what a treadle sewing machine converted into a fly tying vise looks like. You comfortable, Carly? Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. All right, here we go. Now we're looking at several old vices here. We've got the treadle sewing machine with a homemade vise that operates off of this belt that goes to the treadle down below. And that's how the flies were tied back in the 20s, 30s, 40s. A very famous couple in West Yellowstone history are Pat and Sig Barnes, and Sigrid Barnes did almost all the time for their fly shop on a treadle machine. Now over here, this is an old Herder's from the 50s rotating vise. You crank this handle and it rotates these jaws. That's a stationary vise. I don't know how that got in here, but here's a rotary vise also from the 50s. And back here, developed in the mid 80s by a company called Pollard. It's an electric rotary vise. And interestingly enough, the Pollard vise was built right here in Boise. Well, actually not Boise. It was a little town of Chinden, which is a suburb of Boise. And I guess something didn't work out too well with the electric rotary vise because it went off the market in pretty short order. Anyway, so let me put this back and we'll get to doing tonight's actual program. I didn't know whether you guys would find that interesting or not, and you'll have to let me know when you get a chance. Send me an email, alb82@gmail.com. I'd be interested in knowing whether that bit of history was worth my time or whether it's just something I should leave out in the future. But where are we going tonight? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie a concept fly. Now, this might look like a stimulator. That's because it is, except it's been changed a little bit. And that's why I call it a concept fly. It's not a pattern. In fact, that's one that I tied for a presentation that I did about 4 months ago to a group in Canada. And that's what happened to be laying on my tying desk. That's what I used. And that's what I'll be doing tonight is more or less the same thing, but I've got some different colors of stuff laying around here. And in fact, let's take a look at the materials. Then I'll take a look at the recipe. Well, right here are the materials that we're going to be using. Let me find my pointer. Okay. Right here, we're starting out with a hook. These are R200 style hooks. Thread black, can be any color you want. I'm going to be using some peacock. However, the original has dubbing in the same place I'm going to put peacock. Dubbing wax. Dubbing. That's going to be a wild colored body, isn't it? Well, that's what I had laying from leftover from an order, and that's on my desk, and that's what I'm using. I've already had some size grizzly hackle, so there it is. And here's elk. Elk for the wings and tails. Elk for spinning. And in case the elk doesn't spin real well, I just pulled some deer out. And you don't know what the spinning's for, but you'll find out before the evening's over. All right, let's move this out of the way for a moment. And let's see here. Get to the recipe. And as I say, this is a concept fly. So the only thing that remains constant on it is basically the hook and a couple of the normal materials like, okay, thread. Well, yeah, you're going to use thread. And I'm using black tonight, but you can use multiple colors based on the color of the body and the pattern that you're going to put together. The tail is going to be elk hair. The body hackle will be grizzly, or your choice. The original one, originally published by Randall Kaufman, had brown on the back and grizzly in the front. I'm just going to use grizzly all the way through. It's the easiest way, and besides, tonight's presentation is not a pattern. It's a technique, rotary tying. Anyway, the dubbing can be whatever choice you want it to be. The wing will be elk, the thorax peacock or dubbing, hackle grizzly, and the head is thread. And let's just come back. And that's looking at the one more or less in the direction that we'll be going tonight. Now, let me check my notes real quick to make sure I haven't forgotten anything. And I think I'm probably good to go. So let's start by getting this out of the vise. I'll set that aside. Get a hook in the vise. And one of the things I want you to notice is that when I rotate the vise, you see how that hook shank right here, the flat part, stays pretty stable? It's called on axis. It's an important feature of rotary tying. It's on axis. Now, there is no way to take this curved part and put it on axis, but it's close enough for what we're going to be doing. And real quick now, I need to put on another pair of glasses for real close-up work.
While you're doing that, Al?
Yeah.
I have a quick question.
Absolutely.
Jim Anderson wants to know how he writes, how does it hold a hook? I'm imagining that's probably the treadle vise that you showed us.
The jaws, you actually rotate the jaws until they grab the hook and then give them a good hard scrunch, whatever you want to call it, tighten them up, and then it holds them that way. It's Gretchen and I wrote a book on rotary tying techniques, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. It was a while. And the first chapter was using that old vise. And I do the rough drafts of all of the stuff that we do, and then she makes it look like the English language. She's really good at that. Used to be an English teacher. So she takes my mess and cleans it up. Well, it took me a year to write the first chapter, and I wrote the rest of the book, and the first chapter wasn't done because it was this vise that I couldn't do anything but I had this thing in my mind that I would have to tie the fly with the vise to actually write the chapter. It took me a year to learn how to tie with my feet, essentially. She's quite good at it, though, have to tell you. Anyway, back to this. Was there any more questions before I get started on that?
Nope, we're good.
Okay, good. Well, let's just pop right over here to the materials area. Let me grab a couple of items. I'm going to need thread right off the bat. And I think I'll just put the hackle over there and get it out of my way over here. And it'll just be laying over in the tying area when I'm ready for it. And one of the things that I do need to talk about quickly here is static guard. Now, I know many of you live in a part of the country where it's fairly humid. But here in the Rocky Mountain West, where we're in what's called the high desert, and static electricity is a real problem, especially when tying with hair. So you saw that I have static guard there, and I used that, and I sprayed it on all of my materials. And if you happen to live in a dry area and you're having trouble with your hair, especially if it seems to stick to the stacker, doesn't want to stack, just doesn't want to behave, there's a good chance that static electricity is your problem. And you can go to the supermarket and get static electricity in the laundry detergent aisle. That's where you'll find it. Anyway, back over to the materials. One other thing I wanted to talk about, thanks to Jim Ferguson and Kathy Hamilton, a thing called thread magic. I know none of you ever have a problem, but I've been doing yard work throughout the week, and my hands just go to heck when I first start digging around in the mud in the spring. And tying flies after doing that is really a pain. Thread magic is magic, and it's available on Amazon. Let me do a real tight shot on it here at the vise so you can kind of, that's what it looks like. You can go on Amazon and just type thread magic in and get some of that stuff. It'll be a treat. If you ever have any trouble with thread or floss snagging on your fingers because they're dry and cracked, that's the stuff for you right there. Anyway, back over there. Let's start by pulling my thread up here. And here, I'll start right out with a tip that don't have anything to do with rotary tying. And that is, you'll notice that I've got an O-ring on my bobbin. And that's to hold the thread so it won't come undone. Can't tell you how many times there's something about flying that causes all of my bobbins to unthread themselves before I get to my destination, wherever that might be. And anyway, that rubber O-ring takes care of that. I'm going to lay down a thread base. It starts about 1/3 back on the hook shank, and I'm going to wrap to the end of the shank. And on this hook, because it's got a curved shank, where does the shank actually end? Well, it ends right at the throat of the barb, and my thread is hanging straight down, pretty close where the throat of the barb would have been if I hadn't pinched it a little bit. So right there, that's where our body area will be. Now I'm going to wrap forward real quick, because I'll be doing hair. It doesn't make any difference if I have a real smooth underbody, but I want you to notice one thing. Let me just zoom in here. Right here, I want you to notice that I did not bring my thread back all the way to the starting position. That's to defeat a thing called material creep. And material creep is when you don't allow for the dimension of your material, and you tie it on, cut it off, and it sneaks forward on the hook a little bit. And you know you've been you had material creep cause you trouble when you tie your fly. Everything is looking great until you have to wrap the hackle, and all of a sudden you find at the front of the hook there's no hook left to put the hackle on. You've been you've had material creep make your life miserable, and I'm going to show you how to defeat it. Let's go back over here to the materials, and let me just lay a couple of these things aside. I'll lay that deer hair there aside. I don't need that until later. I will lay this aside just to give you a quick comparison. When you're tying your hairwing flies, you'll find that if you use the darker hair on elk, same thing on deer, comes from the backbone area of the animal, it's better for wings and tails. This is from the rib. It's very light in color. It's also very porous and is more for spinning, and we'll be using that for something later. Let me show you what a complete hide looks like on that. This is a deer, but let's get to the elk because we're with elk today. Now you can see right here, all along here, that real dark hair, and it extends down into the rib area on both sides. So all this dark hair, the neck, backbone, back here on the rump, is all great tailing material. And the good spinning material, the stuff that flares a lot, is down here. So I'll just set that aside for now. So I want you to notice that rather than using this light stuff, which we know is good for spinning, but it don't make very good wings and tails, I am going to be using some of this hair that's a little bit darker. And I'll just come in here with my scissor points and lift out enough hair for what I think will make a pretty good tail on this fly. Let me just cut that off. And I'm going to move right over to the vise because I want to point something out to you. I want you to notice that there's a slight curve in that bundle of hair. Not much. In fact, when it was in the package in the fly shop, you wouldn't even notice that there was a curve there until you get it home and you find that curve that's like that. You can straighten those curves out though. And curved hair does not stack real well. Straight hair does. So I'm going to take my thumbnail, forefinger, and put a series of crimps along the outside bend of that curve to straighten out the hair. Now you don't have to fight with any more of the hair. Now, the second thing we need to learn about is layers of hair. I see so many fly tyers will spend $1,000 on a fly rod and all the stuff that goes with it, and they won't throw away a half a cent worth of hair. Well, the hair that makes really good wings and tails is layers 1, the really long stuff, layers 2 right below it, and all this other stuff sticking up is throwaway. So half of my bundle is going to go away. So I'm going to grab this right out here on the tips and rapidly run my finger up and down through the waist end here to get rid of the under fur and shorter fibers. I'm going to do that though out over the waist bin that's behind me here, rather than try to do it in front of my camera and get fuzz all over the camera lens. So I'll be right back. I'll slip out over here and clean that out. It's really important though that you rapidly run your finger up and down like that. You don't stroke it out like this. Remember, we're trying to get rid of static electricity. If you stroke that, about 3 strokes and the static electricity all came back. But if you go this way and that way, you're reversing polarity each time you do that, and the static electricity don't build back up. And you're able to get all that stuff cleaned out. Okay, now let me get my hair stacker out. And before somebody asks, this is a homemade hair stacker. I got 24 of them, love them dearly. They are not for sale. Every time somebody sees my hair stackers, they want to buy them. They're not for sale. All right. I've stacked the hair, and we've got a couple of problem fibers in there we're going to have to get rid of. As you can see, there's one that didn't stack very well, and there's a couple of broken ones in there. And I'll just get in there with my thumbnail and pull them out the best I can. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now let's see if I have to restack or whether I can get by. I think I better restack. I want to have a good looking fly, and I misaligned a few of those, getting some of that waste out. There, that looking better. All right. Now, here's what hair flare or what material creep is. I am going to measure my tail for length, and I want the tail to be about the gap of the hook, give or take. And I want you to really watch carefully what happens. You see how that just flares up all over the place? That's the reason that that we're using this instead of something else that would flare back like that. Okay, let's continue wrapping towards the back of the hook, stopping at the end of the shank, or where we've identified the end of the shank to be at about the throat of the barb. And I want you to notice when we look, let's take a look up here real close. I want you to notice what's happened. I wrapped back to within 2 turns of my end of my thread application there, and the bulk of the material means I trim it exactly on the starting point. Had I not done that, I'd have the materials creeping forward on me, and eventually I'd have trouble. Now let's get back out here, and I'm going to take one of these hackles. We'll get it the longest one I've got, just because it's easier to work with, and I'll set these others aside. And for those of you that don't know how to size hackle, I used this gauge right here. It's an old one from, kind of had it since, I don't know, the early 60s. No, the early 70s, not the 60s. I didn't have one then. in the 60s. And what you do is you just take the material and you find out where does it come to the edge of the gauge. And that's a 12. And usually on stimulators, the hackle is about one size smaller than the hook, and I'm using a 10 right now. Now I'm going to put this right here on the bottom of the shank, and I want you to notice that I'm leaving a pretty good gap there of strip stem so that I don't cause my fiber. Here's what happens when you don't do that. Let me just tie it in real quick and show you. Okay, now when I get ready to wrap that, you see how all those fibers are sticking back like that? Well, if that's happening to you, the fix is very simple. Let's just pull that out now so that we have just a bare stem to make that first turn. And after that, the turns will all be in line. Okay, so let me bind that in place. And now you're asking yourself, this is supposed to be a rotary presentation. Don't worry, I'll get to it in just a moment. Let's get back over here to the materials. I'll grab my dubbing wax and the dubbing. The dubbing can be any color you want. I just happened to, the last order I was working on was this kind of reddish color, and that's what was laying here, so that's what we're using. I'll just get that opened up and get it pulled out of the packet real quick. Right. That. Get my wax out. Now, wax. I want to talk to you about wax. This wax is great stuff. When you take the lid off, I recommend that you turn it upside down and put it straight down on the desk in front of you. And why is that? Because invariably what I'll end up doing is I'll take that doggone wax and I'll use it, set it down, and then I'll knock it into my waste bin. Trust me, when that stuff goes into the waste bin, you don't want to have to clean it up. It's a mess. Anyway, back to this. Now we're back to tying flies again. And let's just stroke some of this wax on the thread. Now I want you to notice that when I go back, I go straight down into that cap, putting it back on. So there you go. Set that back out of the way. Now let's just touch our dubbing to that sticky thread. It's called touch dubbing. Just one of the ways of putting dubbing on a thread. And in fact, that's what it looks right there. And I did not do anything to it at this stage except just touch it to the sticky thread. Okay, I'll set the dubbing down. And I'll twist in one direction, a clockwise direction, based on a little person standing on the hook shank looking down. So you're looking down, and when you're looking down, it'll be clockwise from that perspective. Okay, there we go. And then I'll start wrapping my body. And you notice that I'm starting at the front. Well, let's start at the front. And I still haven't used the rotary function yet. Wait a minute, I could use the rotary function to apply the material. In fact, I could speed the process up and check the opposite side of the fly by wrapping by hand and rotary tying at the same time. And that's what we're doing until we get right up here to where I have a good chance of snagging the hook. Now, I don't know about all of you. You'll have to decide this on your own. I find that I can avoid the hook point a lot better if it's up in front of me instead of down below. I don't know. It makes no sense, but that's what seems to work for me. Anyway, so I'm just going to go ahead and wrap back now into the bend of the hook there, into the end of the body. Now, now we're going to apply this hackle using rotary techniques. And I want you to notice that I am got the thread and the feather parallel. I'm going to grab them and work my way forward, thread and hackle going together until I get to the front spot. Then I have to drop my hackle and undo everything and tie it down, or I could do something different. Let me back up and show you. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my third finger on the left hand. Don't think it. Don't even think it now. And hold the thread. And then I'm going to hold the material, the hackle, with the other. And I'm just going to show you a fast and slick way to tie off your material. And there it's tied off. And how did I do that? I dropped the thread off of my finger. It's called the drop tie off. Let's do that one more time, just for the heck of it. Okay. Now, we're going to hold these two together and coming forward, coming forward. Now it's time to tie off. Notice that I dropped the bobbin and I just kept turning the hackle and it's tied off with 2 turns of thread, just like that. Well, when I slow it down and explain it, it's real easy, but you can look like a gee whiz fly tire, just going zip up, drop it, and it didn't come apart, and it's like magic. Well, there was no magic involved. It was just a sleight of hand, sort of like. Anyway, I'm just going to cut that off right there. Doesn't really need to be, but I don't know. There's something about having it in the way that bugs me when I'm trying to do my wings. Let's get back over here now and get another bundle of this hair. And just like before, I'm going to have to straighten it out before I clean it and make it into a wing. Well, I'm going to do that right here. You won't be able to see quite as good as you did when I did the close-up, but you know what I'm doing. Right now, I'm straightening the bundle. Okay, that looks pretty good. I got a couple of wild ones that didn't straighten out real well. I'll get rid of them. Grab a hold of it way out on the end, so I got 1 and 2, and I'm going to get rid of all the stuff from here to here, other than the shorter in the trash. So I'll just pop over here to the waste bin and do that. Okay. And now we're back over here with the hair that's going to be our wing. And I've got a problem. I sprayed about an hour ago, getting ready for tonight's presentation. I sprayed everything down with Static Guard, and the furnace is running right now. And it's getting staticky again, and the hair is starting to stick to me. Let me give you another trick. This is a large spray bottle or spray can of Static Guard. You can't see that because around the outside I have rubber banded in place a bounce pad that goes into your electric clothes dryer. And the purpose of the bounce pad is to get rid of static electricity. Well, the hair is starting to stick to my hands and causing me trouble right now. So all I have to do is just grab that thing just like that. And now my hands will be good and I can get back to tying flies. So let's stack this hair. Okay, and do I have, oh, I got some bad ones here. I'll just work them out. Okay, and I misaligned them a bit, so I'll restack them. On my fishing flies, I probably wouldn't worry about it, but I'm trying to impress all of you that I know how to tie flies, so I'll make it look as the best that I can. Now we'll set this in place. First off, I want to move my thread forward slightly so it's in the center of what we call the thorax area. It just makes it a lot easier to work with. All right, and I want to measure my wing so that the wing comes to the end of the tail. And I'll show you a trick that has nothing to do with rotary tying. And that is, often thread torque will take your materials and place them on the other side of the hook. Like that's happening right there. It's just rolling over there. It's, oh, rats. And it's going to end up on the bottom of the hook and all kinds of things that are just drive you nuts. Well, let me show you a way to counteract that. And that's just taking a loop of thread around the bundle before we put it right down on the hook shank. And messing around there and showing you, I ended up misaligning those fibers. So I'm just going to stack them again real quick. All right. Now to the end of the tail. And I want you to notice that the bundle of hair is not down on the shank. That's because I'm going to take that thread torque that drives everybody crazy and just take its wind out of the sails. Now that I've got a loop around that bundle, I'll bring it down to the hook shank and bind it in place, and it can't do anything but stay on top. All right, there we go. Now I like my wings to have a tight profile. Some people like their wings to flare out, and if that's the way you like them, that's the way you want to tie them. But for right now, what I'm going to do is trim this at a severe angle so I get a good tapered hackle platform on which to wrap my thorax and the hackle. Now, before I go into the next part, which is the thorax and wrapping hackle, just see if there's any questions out there from all of you all. Looks like I can go back to work.
I've got nothing.
Okay, great. That means I've either I probably put everybody to sleep. That's what it is. I know.
Not me.
Okay. Let's get over here now to the materials area. And this is a small area on a hook that I'm going to cover. So I think one strand of peacock herl will do just fine. And I'm going to break the rules just a little bit. But I wanted to show you something else here. I'm going to tie this on at the front. And I'm going to just take a few turns around that thread. And now we're just going to start applying our peacock, starting at the front, going to the back. And then I'll tie that off right back here. What I want you to notice is that so far, we don't have anything up here as trash, what I call trash in the head. That last little bit of stuff that's almost impossible to cover up and takes a good looking fly and messes it up because it's got a big lopsided head after you try to cover it up with turns of thread. It's happens to everybody. Doesn't make any difference how long you've been tying, it happens. Now I'm going to wrap back forward with my thread only through that peacock. What I'm doing now is actually bulletproofing that peacock. Okay, and I'll just grab my half hitch tool and throw a half hitch in there. Now we're going to get into another rotary feature that it's a mistake that I often see, but I'm going to help you with it. Let's go to the offside here. I'm going to bring my bobbin rest around. Now most people do their bobbin rest like this, and they move it up there in front of the fly, lay the thread over it, leave the bobbin hanging down. Should look about normal. Let me move the bobbin up so you can see it just a little bit better. There you go. And then you start doing whatever you're going to do. You're going to do your rotary function, and it hangs there. Okay, now here's the trick. Now, when I decide I'm going to start wrapping that thread again, I move the bobbin rest out of the way, and oh, Jesus, this thread is all clear down to where my hand is going to hit the table when I go to wrap. So I have to turn the bobbin back to what I call working length. What's working length? Well, that's that stretch of thread from here to the bobbin. And that's about a half an inch, about 3/4. And I stay between 3/4 and 1.25 inches, depending on what I'm doing, so that I can just grab my bobbin and continue wrapping. Well, what am I trying to tell you? If you'll change your bobbin rest from a thread rest to a bobbin rest, which is what it ought to be, what you do is you lower it slightly. Let me go to this side. I'm going to lower this slightly so that it's below the hook, so that when I place my bobbin over that, it makes the thread right in line so that I can wrap whatever I'm going to wrap. And when I'm done, I can just move that out of the way and continue tying. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap the hackle. There we go. And I'll stop right there. Now this is where it's so much easier with the keeping the working lengths all the time without having to turn the bobbin up, because all I have to do now is tie off my hackle. Now let me move this bobbin rest out of the way. Now that don't seem like much until you've about the 30th time in a day that you have to rewind your thread because you pulled it out and you didn't need to. There's other ways to get it done. Now, right now I have 2 turns of thread anchoring that feather in place. Now here's how you can take a pretty decent looking fly and mess it up. Well, I think to myself, my gosh, I don't want that fly to come apart. I better put another couple of turns of thread on there to hold that feather in place. So I go turn number 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, 20. 20 turns will do it. It's got to. And so you do the 20 turns, you cut off the feather, and you have that stub sticking out. And you say, oh, rats. Well, I better cover that stub up. The end product will end up being a good looking fly with a big lopsided head. Let me show you an alternative, and it don't have anything to do with rotary tying. It has to do with regular tying. There's my original 2 turns holding that feather in place. What I'm going to do now is move my thread from behind where it captured the feather, and I'm going to take the feather and push it back and then wrap a thread head and a jam knot. It's a combination thread head jam knot, forcing this feather back like that. So we call that dog-legging the hackle, because the hackle was first, the stem was pointing this way, and then we forced the stem to go this way, turning it in about a 45-degree angle. And that helps keep it from pulling out, especially when you wrap the thread head tight up against it, which is what I'm going to do right now. And see, each turn of thread goes further back, further back, further back, building a head. Now, that's a pretty decent looking head. And you see what it's done to the hackle. It's run it back at a really sharp angle. So with that dog leg in there, it's not going to break. So now before I cut the hackle off, I'm going to take my whip finish tool and I'm going to apply a whip finish starting at the back of the head and making each subsequent turn closer to the hook eye, not the other way around. 3, 4. And I'll tighten that up. And I'll cut out the thread. And now let's take care of this feather. Do not reach in with your scissor points and clip it. What you want to do instead is to reach in with the edge of the scissor and break the feather off, like that. Because what you do is you leave behind the fibers that were on that stem rather than cutting them off, and any ones that were right around it. Now what we'll do is we'll go around and we'll dress everything up, make sure it looks good. And there we've got a fly that you can see from several directions. It's a pretty decent looking fly, and I'm pleased to say that the head came out looking that if you were doing a bronze, a silver, or a gold FFI award fly, I don't think anybody would ding you on the head on that fly. Okay, and there we are. Any questions up to this point?
No, I did have a comment sent to me personally from Robert Ingleson that says this is very good, Rick, and I totally agree with that.
Well, good. All I'm trying to do is just share with you a few tips that I've picked up, and Gretchen. I mean, we picked them up together in a lot of years at the Vice, and there are some of these things that sound so simple that you'd say, well, why didn't we think of that? Well, the truth of the matter is, as an example, dog-legging the hackle. I fought that for years And it's only been like the last 20 years that we've been doglegging the hackle and making a clean head that way. I got to tell you, the gyrations we went through with crazy glue and all the other stuff that you probably have tried yourselves to come up with a nice, small, neat head and still get the feather anchored off it's been a challenge. And that's a simple one right there. And the trick with the bobbin rest, just lowering it down a little bit and keep your thread at working length so you don't have to keep changing it back and forth.
Yeah.
All this fly tying stuff is simple once you figure it out. I'm sorry, Rick, you were going to say?
I've got another question from Jim Anderson. How would you fly? How would you fish that fly?
I'm a bit unorthodox when I fish any fly. It's a dry fly.
In the water.
Jim, that's the short answer. The longer answer, Jim, is going to be, there's the stream. I'm in the stream and it's coming from in this direction. So it originates up there. So I'm going to quarter upstream, throw a couple of mins so that I can get a good drift and let it come past me. And when most fly fishers would pick it up and then try to put it right back up there and do another drift, not me. I'm going to throw a couple of loops at it and let it swing down. And I'm going to wet fly swing it until it drops below me. Then I'm going to take and pull out about another foot and a half of slack and all of a sudden just let it go right downstream. I cannot tell you how many fish I have caught. It comes and swings, it holds downstream. And when I throw that a foot of line and it's slack line and it drops straight downstream, bam, you're into a fish. And if you're not, then make your cast, cross the shoulder, back around, and up there and just do the whole thing all over again. And if you've got your fly pretty well, I'm sorry?
Isn't that called the Liza ring lift?
I don't know. The Liza ring lift has to do with stuff that's under the water. And Jim, I don't know.
Well, it's the same thing because I do the same thing you just described with a dry fly or a emerger or even a tied down caddis. It's below where you rip out about 6 feet and just let it, and it starts to sink down below. And then as it lifts up, those fish hit it.
Yep, absolutely. It's it's just one of those things, and it's like a lot of stuff you learn at the vise on the water, things by accident. The biggest fish, river fish of my life, I had the rod up under my armpit. The fly is hanging downstream and I'm trying to light a cigarette when the fish hits. Well, and I'm on the Kootenai River, and if anybody that knows the Kootenai River, the son of a gun can be a bit difficult to wade up and down. You have to be careful. And I was young then. I mean, so it wasn't that big of a problem, but still I had to be careful. So anyhow, I finally landed this fish. It was a 28-inch rainbow caught out of the Kootenai River. It's the biggest river fish I've ever caught. I mean, I've caught steelhead and other things, but I'm talking about a river fish. That was a good one. And it was all done on a Renegade. And you got to tuck it under your arm though the right way or you'll lose the fish. So, and I'm being a wise guy on that. But any other questions before we move on?
Thank you very much, Al.
Got a comment from Joseph Rendell. Says, I'll say what everybody's thinking. Al's videography, teaching style, and thoughtful content are excellent.
Thank you. I totally appreciate that. I'm constantly working on that, and it's just like our writing. My Gretchen was a college professor type, and I was a construction lineman cable splicer for the phone company. You can imagine who knows where to put a verb in a sentence. I do now, but I had to be trained. So anyhow, let's see any other questions before I go on to the next part of the presentation?
Just Pat Reeves says he agrees with what Joseph had to say.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
And another name for that middle finger is the long finger.
Thank you, Jim. I needed something because I have tried everything under the sun. I tried using a little finger. It's got to be the long finger. Thank you, Jim. It's got to be the long finger, and to hold that thread just right for that drop tie off. Anyway, where was it? Jim just got me all screwed up here.
I'll mute myself.
Thank you, Jim. That's very much appreciated. I probably should mute myself for the next few seconds here as well. Okay. we're moving into something again. Remember, I'm going to tie a fly, but it's a concept. It is a method of tying. I know many of you are probably very accomplished at spinning hair. Then maybe some of you are not as accomplished at spinning hair. I am going to show you how to use your rotary vise to always spin the hair perfect every time. And the fly that I'm going to tie will be a Goddard caddis, somewhat modified. And I am going to move over to the vise right now. Set this fly aside. And as you can see, now these flies, both concept flies. Whoops. Let me get a hold of it right here. There we go. They're both concept flies. Just a few different materials. Change, get my thumb out of the way. Changes everything. That will appear to the fish. One, look how much darker one is than the other. Those are all important things based on the water clarity and how bright the sun is and all that stuff. But set that aside. Let's don't get waylaid on that. Let's get over here. And now I'm just going to put a long shank hook in the vise and make certain that I'm on axis. Well, better straighten that up a little bit. Okay, on axis meaning that it pretty much in line. All right. And I'm going to show you how to use the rotary function to tie the to wrap spin thread. I'll get it right here in a minute, guys. To spin hair. Let's get over here to materials. Now I'm going to use some of the really light colored elk because it's light spins and dark wings and tails. That's the easiest way to explain it. It's a lot more complicated than that, but for the purposes of this demonstration, that's good enough. I'm just going to get a bundle out here. I don't need to worry about whether it's curved or whether I'm using layers 1, 2, 3, or 4. All I have to do is get rid of the fuzz that's right there. And so I am going to pop out over my waist bin and get rid of that fuzz. You can see that what I'm doing, holding that up, get rid of the fuzz, come out over the trash bin that's right here behind me. And get back over here. Now, this first bundle on a Goddard caddis is flared in place. It is not spun. So I'll just flare that in place. And you see how I'm wiggle wrapping through those ends? That allows me to anchor that in place. And see that I never did let go of the original hair. Well, the Goddard caddis is trimmed at an angle like that on the back. And so we've just done the back of the fly. Okay, now we're going to get down to using the rotary function to help us wrap. First off, I want you to notice that I did not leave my thread tied up against the previously wrapped thread. When you do that, it's like trying to rub up against a wall and turn around. It's not as easy as if you step out away from the wall a little bit and turn around and your shoulders don't have to mash up against everything and the rest of your body doesn't either. Now I'm going to get back over here and get another bundle of hair. Whoops, wrong camera. Another bundle of hair right here. Go back to the bin and get rid of the underfur, and we'll just come right back here. Now, the first bundle, I am going to spin it by hand like most people do, and I'm going to explain to you the things that have got to happen to successfully, evenly spin a bundle of hair around the hook. First off, you have to set it in place, and I like to anchor it there with 3 turns, snug but not tight. And I trim the waist. Now, here's what's important. I want you to notice that as I bring pressure on this, I come around the hook. I keep even pressure all the way around that hook, gradually increasing that pressure, and that's what causes the hair to spin. There we go. To spin like you're going to see right now. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase pressure as I wrap. And that gives me a nicely spun bundle of hair. And as you can see, it's fairly good. Not the best, but it'll do. Now let's get up here again. We're going to use the rotating feature of the vise to apply that next bundle of hair. In other words, I'm going to hold the bobbin steady right up here where my finger is, and I'm going to rotate the vise, and without moving the bobbin, it gradually increases the tension on that thread. So, and that's what we want to do. Let me get over here and get another bundle of hair. And we're back to getting rid of the trash out over the waste bin. And now we're going to set this bundle in place just like we did before when we wrapped it with thread tension and moving our hand. Okay, 3 turns, trim. Now, I'm going to try to keep the bobbin. I am going to pinch the bobbin so that it can't turn. Won't let the spool of thread turn. So as I turn the bobbin, or excuse me, as I turn the vise and the bobbin is stationary, it will gradually increase the tension on the thread until it makes the hair spin just by rotating. So let me get that. I'm going to first off lay my scissors down because I do not want them getting in the way while I do that. And I'm going to pinch and hold. Okay, I'm going to start rotating. Starts to rotate. It's getting ready to spin. Just spun. The tension had to build up enough to spin. Let me get back here and do another one. And remember, you don't want to leave those turn right up next to the ones you just spun. Come forward a little bit. And I'll just reach over. You already know what I'm doing when I cut a bundle of hair out. Then you know what I'm doing when I go over the waste bin, so I don't need to keep showing you that shot. I mean, you can't really see what I'm doing when I'm over the waste bin. You just know that I'm there. And now I'm back to the vise. And I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit now because you know that I'm just going to take 3 turns, anchor that in place, clip, hold the bobbin so it can't turn, rotate the vise. And it just spun the hair. And we'll do that again. And I'll just get over here and get another bundle of hair. Get rid of the under fur. And get back over here to you all. And it about 3 turns and it gets tight enough that it has to spin. And because there's an even and consistent pressure on that thread, it will distribute the hair evenly around the hook. The reason when you hand spin your hair that one side has got more than the other side is because even though you don't think you do it, your hand actually kind of jiggles as it goes around the hook, and there's more tension in some spots in that journey around the hook than there is in other spots, and that's what causes the misaligned hair. But anyway, back over to the vise. So now we're at a point where, well, I think I need one more bundle of hair before I trim the body. So I'll just work my way forward. And you know what? I just for the fun of it, I'm going to put some deer hair on there. See how that works. And I'll just take this bundle of deer hair that I cut. Well, it sure feels different. Anyway, I've never done this before, so folks, it will either work out or it'll be a train wreck, one of the two. And you'll be here to witness it. Now let's get these fibers up here. This is the winter kill animal, and my gosh, there's a lot of under fur. Tough to get rid of. All right. All right, now stationary, don't let the thread slip. And there it's done, spun in place. Now I'm going to just take and throw a quick whip finish on there. Trim that off, and now it's time to trim the hair. Well, use the rotating feature to trim hair. I can't tell you how many people I see do this. And then they start trying to hold it and trim it, and oh, what a joy it is to just keep moving around. Well, let's just keep it all on one plane and make our trims in relation to that plane. Okay, so turn it upside down. And let's just cut flat straight along there. By the way, a good thing to do is you do this just before house cleaning day, because after you've done several dozen of these for your fly boxes, you're going to find that the house is a mess. Something about this stuff that gets all over the place. Okay, anyway, so I've got this flat. All right. Now what I'm going to do now is tilt my scissors at that kind of an angle so that I can trim the rest of it, and I'll just gradually move the vise as I keep the scissors going. And there's the Goddard caddis body. You should trim those right there about, there we go. And let's put the thread back on. And I'll tie my feather back on. Now, what often happens with this particular fly, because it's a fly destined for some really rough water, the customer, fly shop or regular customer, will request a heavily placed hackle, a heavy hackle, not just a standard one or two passes. So take your thread and your feather and hold them together and wrap to the front. Okay, let's wrap to the back. And let's go back to the front. Now we get a nicely heavy hackle tied off with 2 turns. Does anybody want to know what comes next? It's a dog leg. We're going to dog leg the hackle. And again, we want to make a nice, delicate head there. I'll let you see that the head's looking pretty good. And so I'll whip finish it. Okay. And there's the Goddard caddis. You'll notice that my Goddard caddis is a concept fly. It doesn't have any antenna on it. And the original has an antenna on it. And if you've ever been a guide in Montana, the first thing the guides do when you pick up a bunch of those at the fly shop is cut all the antennas off, because unless your customer is an incredibly skilled fly caster, they'll be so tangled up and nothing flat just because of those antenna. But you cut them off, they don't do anything to catch fish. They catch fishermen. But the part that you see right there, that's what catches the fish. Any questions?
All right, I got several here, and one from earlier from John. Right, and he says, Al, why don't you use your rotary techniques on FTF, and other presentations I've watched.
John, I tied professionally Rotary presentations for 30 years, but I've been at this 65 years, and you know what? An old dog just kind of falls back into the old groove, and I'm sorry. I do that, and this is funny. I cannot tell you how many times I saw this, and the reason we wrote the Rotary book back 12, 15 years ago, whatever it was, is we go to the San Mateo show, which is just outside of San Francisco, and we were featured fly tires for that. Well, going into the featured room where they had the cameras set up for the videotaping and all that, there's a long hallway. And along that hallway are the people that are kind of aspiring to be the featured tires, and they're all along there presenting what they're doing, working their way up to the point where they end up in front of the camera. Well, anyway, so Gretchen and I are walking in one day to do our gig in front of the camera, and we noticed something. There's about a dozen fly tires along this hallway. Every one of the dozen fly tires had a rotary vise. The vise stuck up like this. They'd look like this, they'd look over here, they'd look over here, and they'd wrap. And like John Wright said, why didn't they use the rotary feature of their vises? Once in a while, they'd look at the other side. And that's when we decided to write the Rotary book. And yeah, I do a lot of things Rotary. And some of it, I really have to set my camera system up to be able to do a good job of presenting to all of you in Rotary. It's got to be set up a little bit different than it is for the regular wrapping of stuff that we do for our normal presentations. Anyway, there was that question. Now, is there something else, Rick?
Yeah, Bill Klumper has asked, is there a specific length in the hair stack for the first 3 wraps? Am I right to presume length of hair on the patch will impact the flare and the wrap point?
The hair only needs to be long enough. I've had a bundle that was like that when I really only needed about that much. So I wrapped it on and cut it off. And that's a really important thing. I want you to notice, at least I think, and the way I teach my spun hair classes, is I show them to tie the hair on and cut off the waist. Don't cut the waist off and then try to spin the hair. And that's, I don't know, that's just one of the things that I found that seems to help. You can decide that yourself, having watched, whether it's better than what you do or your system is better. And don't change what you're used to doing. I'm just sharing with you what has worked for me. And any other questions?
James says, son of a gun. Great, Al.
Okay, I didn't know son of a gun was good, but that's good, I guess.
And John added to his previous question, good, I'm the same way. All my vices are rotary. And I never used that feature. The only time I used the feature to turn the fly upside down and to cut materials off, not cut thread.
Well, if you'll recall back on the stimulator that I said, I started doing the rotary presentation part when I wrapped the body. I wrapped a couple of turns by hand, and then I rotated the vise and wrapped at the same time. And that's a way of speeding it up. But the other thing it's really good at is it lets you see the other side of the vise. I mean, think about it. Let's just take this fly right here. Darn hell, that's a good looking fly. Oh no, I missed something on the other side. Has that ever happened to you? I'll bet you I see heads nodding all over out there. Yes, it's happened to you. And why has it happened to you? Because if you think I have figured out anything you haven't, we all have the same problem. But if you wrap and rotate at the same time, you speed it up. And you also look at the other side and make sure you don't miss anything.
It does help sometimes when you're doing ribbing to make sure that way you can see both sides as you're wrapping to,
Absolutely.
Especially if you're tying for one of those awards where I'm looking
Jim is one of the awards inspectors as well. I saw Fred Dupre on here, and there might be some others, but those are just 2 that I saw as they were signing on. And I cannot tell you, if you always look at the fly from the perspective of the tire side, the other side can really be messed up. And as an evaluator, it's not uncommon to see a perfect 5 ribs looking at one side, and you got them messed up so bad on the other side, you can't tell what you got.
Hey, Al.
Yes.
So to kind of add to Jim's comment, one of the things I found is like if you're doing let's just say a Carrie Stevens, Rangeley Lake type streamer where it's got a long body and it's got a lot of ribbing on it, I find using the rotary, I can grab the rib material and kind of hold it at a specific angle and then turn the rotary and it'll wrap a perfect segmentation on it.
You're right, because if you don't jiggle your hand, it's already lined up to be perfect. And this at wrapping hand over hand, you wiggle things. And you very nailed it right there.
Yeah, I've got several vices all the way down to a Herder's 1951 vise. But I use Norvise exclusively for most things. And I learned right away when I started using it 10 years ago that if you don't utilize it, you get in trouble quick. And what really cemented that in place is when I started tying flies for the bronze award. And that it's perfect for that because you can really keep an eyeball on what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah.
But I learned, I never thought about spinning deer hair with the rotary and kept.
I've spent a lot of deer hair using my Norvise. I've got one. I got 2 of them here. I have one for each of us, and I got to tell you, it's just slicker than a whistle.
Oh yeah, I'm going to start that.
Because you just give it a spin, and then when you use the Norvise, you spin. And when you let go, it'll unwind unless you relax your hand, the other hand, a little bit holding the thread. So you give it a spin, let it spin, and then you stop everything, and otherwise it'll freewheel on you.
Yep, exactly. Okay, let's see. I've got some more stuff here. First of all, Bob Ferreira, first time with this group, really enjoyed, definitely got some tips. Thank you, Bob. Alan Curie, I'm sorry, I'm going to blow that name forever and ever and ever. And I apologize right up front. I really like seeing your iPad or laptop shows the older foot-powered devices in the other rooms. Great presentation as always.
Thank you. I appreciate knowing that. The other thing that I'll ask you guys all this. You can help me with this right now. Let's see. I need to do some adjustments here.
Well, I was at a meeting this past weekend and ran into a fellow who said, "Pass on to you." He was in a museum and saw the rotary vise in a museum and took some pictures of it. And he wanted me to tell you and Gretchen how much he enjoyed seeing that vise in the museum.
Do you know what museum that was?
No, but you know what? I can sure find out for you.
I really would like to know. We donated it to the Federation, and they had it in their museum, and then their museum is closed now. So I'd be very interested to know where it is because, well, that's a part of our family history, number one, and it's also a part of commercial tying history.
Absolutely.
Audrey Joy used to use one of those. Her husband converted the head, but looked very much like yours, except he didn't take off the casing. It looked like a regular Singer sewing machine, but it had the axle coming straight out the top.
Yeah, my father-in-law made several vices, and he had several ladies working for him in his business, and a couple of them he didn't bother. He did just like you said, Jim. Left most of the regular sewing machine there, and just the rotating part was used.
Diana Kane asked, "Can you show a brief rib wrapping? My ribs don't turn out. Where to go? Don't turn out straight."
Okay, yeah. I'll just take this out of the vise, and get this out here. Now, what I'm going to use is a piece of copper wire, and this is very fine wire, And I got it when I was a telephone technician back in the 60s, when they started taking telephones to stop ringing and have them go tweet, tweet, tweet. Well, those little tweeter things replaced a lot of phones that had ringers in them. And I saved the copper wire for tying flies. And over the years, well, we've given some away to people here and there. I had about 500 spools when I started, and by the time we get to the present day, we've got 2 left, one for Gretchen, one for me, and the rest have been given away because this is some pretty darn nice stuff for tying flies. I'm going to put my rib on this on the bottom of the hook. All right, now let me, I'll just put a quick dub body on. I won't even try to make a good looking body out of it. I'll just get it in there. Because we're here to talk about ribs. Whoops, sorry for bumping the camera there, folks. All right. Put a little half hitch in there. And remember the working lengths of the bobbin. Bring your bobbin rest around. Lay it up there so it's in line. And now we're going to put on the rib. And so I'll bring the rib around as if I was going to, we're going to wrap it. Hold it steady. And they will be perfectly placed as long as you don't do this with your hand. I just did, so I probably messed it up. You understand what I'm saying? And then you just go ahead and tie your rib off. And I don't know, let's take a look and see here if you can see in amongst that dubbing or not. Yeah, that's a pretty clean rib application, evenly spaced. If I wanted a certain number, I would adjust the angle that I hold the material at.
Yeah, Al?
Yeah.
Yeah, quite often you'll see Atlantics as well as a lot of trout patterns call for 5 ribs. And people wonder why. Well, when you have 5 ribs, the middle rib or the third rib goes right in the middle of the body. And the human eye has a real good ability to if you put a line out or put 2 dots, it's surprising how accurately you can just take a pencil and hit the midpoint. And so that shortens up trying to figure out how far apart to put the ribs. You just look at that midpoint of that body, and that's where that third rib is going to cross at the top.
Yep, for sure.
That's a good tip. David Buckner's got a question which I missed, and I'll go back to it. It says on the Pollard electric rotary vise, how do you control the rotation speed, foot pedal or other control?
There is I'll go bring it in here. I don't think I've got it plugged in. Just a minute.
Good question. I'm kind of curious myself on that one.
Well, a lot of those foot pedals are a rheostat.
Yep.
And so if you push down real hard on it or far on it, it spins like the dickens. But if you just barely touch it, it's like the accelerator of your car.
Okay, yeah, there's the vise. You can see the hook goes in here, and the go button is here. And how hard you push on that and how hard you adjust the rheostat there will determine how fast the hook will spin. So it takes a little bit of getting used to, but anyway, there you are with that.
And that's heavy enough to sit on a table without clamping it down or anything?
It's I don't know, 10, 12 pounds. It's not a lot. But what I do is, well, you see, you've got a spot here. You can easily set it on the edge of a table and use a C-clamp or something on it.
Okay.
And that's a manual wheel on the other side, Al?
This wheel right here, you use that to move stuff as you wish, but then you push the red button, and this button adjusts the speed.
What vintage is that again?
What? I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. What is
The
what?
vintage?
Vintage.
How old is that? What year?
This was, I found the first advertisement for it in the Federation magazine back in '87. And I think they were out of business by '89. It's just one of those things that didn't take off. And it's manufactured by Pollard Enterprises, P.O. Box 4915, Boise, Idaho. Oh, anyway, it just didn't make it. And when we wrote the book, we were told about this by a lady that had tied in one of the rotary tying factories that was in the valley here. And she had said that the vice, so we went looking for one, and it took me about a month to find one on eBay. Hey everyone, that's it for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us on the FFI techniques. Next time, take care now.